Let's cut straight to it. Most families still shop as if the grocery store will always be full, prices will always stay manageable, and supply problems are things that happen somewhere else to someone else. But the last few years have made one thing painfully clear. That assumption is expensive. Food prices have been climbing in waves, not just on luxury items, but on basics. People buy every single week. Eggs, cooking oils, beef, canned goods, even those quiet pantry staples that never used to feel worth thinking about. And when prices creep up 10% here, 15% there, most households don't react right away. They absorb it. They tell themselves it's temporary. Then one day they look at a receipt and realize they're spending hundreds more a year for the exact same cart. And this is the part many people miss. The real risk isn't just higher prices, it's higher prices combined with thinner inventory, disrupted supply chains, weather damage to crops, and a pantry at home that was never built to handle any of it. Not for months. Sometimes not even for 2 weeks. So this isn't about panic buying, and it's not about some theatrical end-of-the-world fantasy. It's about buying smarter while things are still available, before the next round of price pressure hits. What you're about to hear is a practical list of items worth getting now, because they last, they work hard, and they solve problems most people only notice after the shelves start looking uneven. Some are obvious, some are not, and a few sound strange, right up until the moment you understand why they matter. Start with canned beets. This is one of those foods people ignore because it doesn't feel exciting, and that's exactly why it deserves attention. Beets are shelf-stable, inexpensive, and unusually nutrient-dense for a canned vegetable. You're getting iron, potassium, and compounds that support circulation, which matters more than most people realize when stress is high, sleep is poor, and meals start getting repetitive. But the real reason to keep them is simpler. They break monotony. A lot of emergency food planning collapses into beige food. Rice, pasta, beans, maybe some canned corn, over and over again. By the third week, the problem isn't just nutrition, it's appetite. People start eating less because every meal tastes like the last one. Canned beets cut through that. They add color, acidity, mild sweetness, and enough texture to make a plate feel different. Eat them cold, slice them into a salad, add them to a grain bowl, or toss them into a stew. A can that costs a couple of dollars can keep the rest of your pantry from feeling like punishment. And that's not a small thing. Canned artichokes solve a similar problem from a different angle. They feel like a luxury item, which is probably why most people don't even consider them for a serious pantry. But that's short-sighted. Artichokes bring fiber, magnesium, folate, and antioxidants into a storage plan that usually leans too hard on starches and proteins. More importantly, they change the character of a meal fast. Add them to soup, and the whole pot tastes more intentional. Mix them into pasta or rice, and suddenly dinner feels less like ration management and more like actual food. Over long stretches of shelf-stable meals, that difference matters. Variety isn't indulgence. Variety is compliance. It helps you keep eating, keep your energy up, and avoid the slow decline that happens when your pantry technically has calories but very little appeal. And if that sounds subtle, ask yourself a simple question. How many canned foods in your house right now would you still want to eat after day 12? That question leads directly into white vinegar, which may be one of the cheapest high-value items in any household. A gallon often costs less than a specialty coffee, and unlike a lot of trendy preparedness products, this one actually earns its space. First, preservation. Vinegar helps extend the useful life of produce through pickling and basic food preservation. Second, sanitation. Diluted properly, it can clean surfaces and help manage odors when cleaning supplies get scarce or expensive. Third, general utility. It's useful in cooking, useful in maintenance, and useful in those annoying moments where you suddenly need a simple fix and the store is either out of stock or charging triple. What makes vinegar especially attractive is that it doesn't quietly degrade the way many household supplies do. Stored properly, it lasts. So while other products in your pantry are on a countdown, vinegar just sits there waiting to be useful. For a very low cost, it buys you flexibility. And flexibility is what saves money when conditions are less than ideal. Now let's talk about canned black beans with sauce. Plain beans are fine. useful, cheap, filling. But people often make the mistake of building a pantry that looks efficient on paper and feels miserable in real life. That's how you end up with cabinets full of food nobody wants to eat. Seasoned black beans fix part of that problem. You still get the protein and fiber that make beans such a smart buy, but you also get flavor right out of the can. No extra spices required, no long preparation. No pretending you'll have time and patience to turn bare ingredients into a perfect meal every night. Mix them with rice and you've got a complete protein. Spoon them over potatoes. Add them to soups. Eat them cold if that's what the situation allows. The difference between plain and seasoned may only be $1 or so a can. But when stress is high, that dollar buys convenience, morale, and a much better chance that the food actually gets eaten. Then there's lard, which modern grocery culture likes to treat as old-fashioned, right up until cooking fats get expensive. At that point, old-fashioned starts looking pretty sensible. Lard is calorie-dense, useful for frying and baking, and often cheaper ounce for ounce than many bottled oils. It also stores well when unopened. That matters because fat is one of the hardest things to replace when prices spike. People think in terms of protein and carbohydrates, but dietary fat affects satiety, energy, temperature regulation, and the ability to absorb certain vitamins. Strip enough fat out of the diet and meals stop satisfying people. Lard also has practical crossover uses. It can lubricate, help with basic utility tasks, and in a genuinely constrained situation, it becomes one of those humble products you're glad you didn't dismiss. It's not glamorous, neither is saving money, but both tend to work better than image. Canned spinach belongs in the same category, unglamorous but smart. The moment fresh greens get expensive, spoil faster than expected, or simply look terrible in the produce section, most households don't replace the nutrition. They replace the habit. They just stop eating greens. That creates a slow problem. Less iron, less vitamin A, less calcium, less nutritional density overall. You won't notice it in one day, but after a few weeks the effects start showing up as lower energy, worse recovery, and that vague sense that everyone in the house feels a little off. Canned spinach isn't pretty, and it doesn't need to be. It's cheap, compact, already cooked, and easy to fold into soup, pasta, eggs, casseroles, or rice dishes. 1 or 2 cans in a meal can quietly raise the nutritional floor of the entire pantry. And if you've ever looked at a week of convenience meals and realized almost everything in it was brown, beige, or fried, you already understand why that matters. The next category gets expensive quickly. Shelf-stable fats that make basic food actually worth eating. Ghee is one of the best examples. Most people walk past it because the jar looks expensive compared with butter. But that comparison is too narrow. Ghee doesn't need refrigeration in the same way fresh butter does. It tolerates higher heat, and it adds a richness that can completely change low-cost meals. A spoonful in rice, lentils, vegetables, or noodles can make a pantry dinner feel finished instead of merely assembled. In a period where shopping is tighter and fresh food is less reliable, that matters more than the price tag suggests. By now, you're probably noticing a pattern. The smartest pantry items aren't always the cheapest per unit. They're the ones that stay useful, prevent waste, and keep ordinary food from becoming so dull that people stop eating properly. That's the hidden math most shoppers miss. Honey fits that pattern almost perfectly. It stores for an extremely long time, gives you quick energy, works in cooking, and pulls double duty as a practical home remedy for sore throats and minor wound support. A good jar may cost more up front than processed sweeteners, but you're buying shelf life, versatility, and density in one item. It also solves a morale problem. Sweetness has value when diets become repetitive. Oatmeal with honey is easier to eat than plain oats. Tea with honey feels more normal than another cup of plain hot water. Small comforts matter because they help maintain routine. And routine is one of the first things households lose when money is tight and shopping becomes reactive. Shelf-stable tofu is another item people underestimate because they associate it with preference rather than practicality. But vacuum-packed tofu gives you compact protein without refrigeration, and it adapts to almost any flavor profile you throw at it. That makes it useful in a way many proteins are not. It can go into soup, stir-fry, noodles, curry, rice bowls, or be eaten cold with seasonings if you need something quick. It stretches a meal, absorbs sauces well, and gives you another protein source when everyone else is fighting over the same canned meats. In inflationary periods, having alternatives matters. Not because they're trendy, but because dependence on one category of food is exactly how budgets get trapped. And once you start building around adaptable basics, flavor becomes the next pressure point. That's where canned green chilies earn their place. They're cheap, compact, and wildly effective at changing the tone of a meal. Add them to eggs, beans, rice, soups, casseroles, or ramen, and suddenly the food tastes intentional. They also bring a little vitamin C into a pantry that may otherwise drift toward processed starch and salt. Not enough to build a health lecture around, but enough to be useful. More importantly, they help prevent flavor burnout. This sounds minor until you've eaten the same 6 pantry meals on rotation and realize the issue is no longer hunger. It's enthusiasm. If you want one of the highest nutritional returns per dollar in the entire store, look at premium canned sardines in olive oil. Sardines still suffer from a reputation problem, which is convenient for anyone willing to ignore it. They pack protein, omega-3 fats, calcium from the bones, and usually a better overall nutrient profile than far more expensive convenience proteins. Eat them with crackers, over rice, on toast, or mixed into pasta. The olive oil in the tin even adds extra utility and flavor. They're shelf-stable, compact, and require no cooking. In periods when fresh seafood is out of budget and refrigerated meat is less dependable, that's hard to beat. Hydration is another category people oversimplify. Water matters most, obviously. But under heat, stress, illness, or heavy physical work, plain water isn't always enough. Electrolytes get depleted. That's where canned coconut water starts making sense. It gives you potassium and other minerals in a shelf-stable form that can help when fatigue, cramps, or heat are part of the picture. This isn't something you buy instead of water. It's something you keep alongside it, because real life isn't always climate-controlled and comfortable. Families tend to understand this only after someone in the house is run down and plain water doesn't seem to be fixing it. Canned coconut milk plays a different role. It's one of the easiest ways to add fat, creaminess, and satiety to pantry cooking without depending on fresh dairy. Soups become richer. Curries become possible. Coffee becomes less depressing. Rice dishes become more filling. And here's the larger financial point. A pantry that can turn cheap ingredients into satisfying meals saves more money than one stocked with isolated bargain items that don't combine well. Coconut milk helps turn staples into meals people actually look forward to. The same logic applies to powdered peanut butter. Regular peanut butter is excellent, but powdered versions deserve their own place because they store more efficiently, weigh less, and can be used in more ways than people expect. You can rehydrate it into a spread, stir it into oats, blend it into drinks, add it to sauces, or use it in baking. If you're trying to build pantry depth without sacrificing shelf space, powdered formats matter. They let you store more utility in a smaller footprint. And in a world where people pay a premium for convenience, that kind of efficiency is one of the few places where the numbers can still work in your favor. Fresh butter disappearing after a power outage or a supply disruption may sound trivial, until it happens. Then suddenly, one of the quiet foundations of cooking is gone. Canned butter solves that with a shelf life measured in years rather than days. It gives you dairy fat, flavor, and the ability to make basic foods taste familiar. Spread it on bread, stir it into potatoes, cook with it, or use it to rescue dry pantry meals. There's a reason so many comfort foods start with some form of fat. It carries flavor, adds calories, and makes restricted diets feel less restrictive. That's not weakness, that's human behavior. Canned tomatoes may be one of the most important foundation items on this list. If your pantry can make tomato-based soups, sauces, chili, stews, and pasta dishes, your ingredients suddenly become far more flexible. Tomatoes add acid, sweetness, depth, and enough personality to keep other staples from tasting flat. Without them, a lot of low-cost cooking collapses into the same texture and flavor profile. With them, beans can become chili, rice can become tomato rice, lentils can become stew, and canned meat can become something much closer to dinner than a backup ration. Few products carry that much kitchen leverage for so little money. Dehydrated vegetables are what you buy when you stop thinking in terms of 1 week and start thinking in terms of resilience. Canned vegetables are useful, but they're bulky and heavy. Dehydrated vegetables store more servings in less space, last for years, and can be dropped into soups, rice, pasta, and broth with very little effort. They also help solve a common pantry mistake, assuming you'll always have access to fresh produce to round things out. If prices jump or quality drops, you need a shelf-stable substitute already in the house. Otherwise, the healthy part of the meal quietly disappears. Canned chicken is a workhorse protein for exactly that reason. It's not glamorous, but it's easy. Open the can and it's ready. Add it to soup, pasta, rice, wraps, casseroles, or salads. It gives you complete protein in a form that requires almost no planning. And planning fatigue is real. In difficult stretches, whether that's inflation pressure, a tight month, or an actual outage, people don't fail because they lack theories. They fail because they lack easy options. Canned chicken is easy, familiar, and flexible enough to earn its place. Salt is one of those products so ordinary that people underestimate it. That's a mistake. Salt matters for flavor, preservation, hydration balance, and basic bodily function. It also lasts indefinitely if stored dry, and costs very little compared with what it does. There's also a useful bit of quiet insurance here. Iodized salt provides iodine, which many households don't think about at all, until a diet becomes restricted and nutritional blind spots start appearing. For a few dollars, salt gives you seasoning, preservation capacity, and nutritional coverage in one of the simplest forms possible. Then there's ramen, the item people like to dismiss because it reminds them of college. Fair enough, it's not a complete food, but that's not the point. The point is speed, cost, shelf life, and low fuel use. When someone is tired, stressed, and tempted to order expensive takeout because nothing feels easy, ramen can interrupt that decision. Use the noodles as a base. Add spinach, chicken, sardines, chilies, egg, broth, or leftover vegetables. In 5 minutes, you have something warm and satisfying enough to keep spending under control. Cheap foods become financially dangerous only when they stay nutritionally empty. Used intelligently, ramen isn't a joke. It's a tool. Canned sauerkraut is where this list starts getting smarter than the average pantry conversation. Most people think about calories and protein. Far fewer think about gut health, digestion, or what happens when fresh foods become less frequent. Sauerkraut helps fill that gap. It brings acidity, crunch, and useful fermented qualities to a shelf-stable plan, along with vitamin C and vitamin K. Add it to sausages, potatoes, grain bowls, sandwiches, or eat a little on the side. It wakes up heavy meals and helps your pantry feel less processed. Sometimes the value of a food isn't just what it contains, but what problem it prevents. Bone broth works the same way. It adds more than liquid. Good canned bone broth can bring protein, collagen, minerals, and a feeling of nourishment that plain water-based cooking simply doesn't. Use it as the base for soups, cook grains in it, or drink it warm when you need something restorative. This is also the right moment for a reset. Look at your own pantry for a second. If shopping got harder next month, would your household be eating meals or just ingredients? Because that distinction gets expensive fast. People who think in meals waste less money and cope better under pressure. That's not luck. That's structure. Canned pineapple may sound like an odd fit after broth and sauerkraut, but this is exactly where variety matters. When every meal is heavy, savory, and familiar in the worst possible way, something bright and sweet can reset appetite. Pineapple brings acidity, sugar, vitamin C, and enough contrast to make the rest of the pantry easier to live with. It also works in more places than people assume. Eat it on its own, add it to rice dishes, serve it with meats, or use the juice in marinades. A pantry with no contrast becomes psychologically tiring long before it runs out of calories. Canned cheese sounds strange until you picture week 4 of constrained shopping. where fresh dairy is gone, grated cheese prices look absurd, and every starch-based meal tastes unfinished. Then canned cheese starts looking less like a novelty and more like a practical morale booster. It adds protein and fat, yes, but more than that, it rescues plain food. Rice and beans taste better. Potatoes feel more substantial. Pasta becomes an actual comfort meal. The financial lesson here is almost irritatingly simple. People spend more money when they get bored. Pantry items that fight boredom often pay for themselves. Canned salmon belongs next to tuna, not instead of it. Tuna gives you lean protein. Salmon gives you protein plus omega-3 fats that support brain function and help round out a pantry that can otherwise become too dependent on dry carbs and cheap fillers. It also tends to feel more satisfying, which matters when households are trying to stretch meals without feeling deprived. Use it in patties, rice bowls, salads, sandwiches, or pasta. If you're building a serious pantry and all your seafood planning begins and ends with tuna, you're leaving useful nutrition and variety on the table. Dry lentils may be one of the best budget buys in any store, period. They store for years, cook faster than most dried beans, require no overnight soaking, and deliver protein, fiber, iron, and B vitamins for very little money. That combination is difficult to beat. They also pair with almost everything: tomatoes, broth, spinach, rice, curry bases, canned meats, coconut milk, chilies. Lentils are what smart budgeting looks like when it grows up. Not flashy, not expensive, just deeply efficient. Canned corned beef is heavier, saltier, and more old school, but it earns its place for one reason above all: density. When appetites are high and meals need to hold people over, corned beef brings concentrated protein and fat in a shelf-stable format that can anchor a plate. Hash it with potatoes, serve it with rice, tuck it into sandwiches, or crisp it in a pan if you have the fuel. This isn't everyday health food, obviously, but it is practical food. And practical food tends to matter a lot when budgets are squeezed and fresh meat becomes inconsistent. Powdered whole milk is another item many people write off based on bad memories. Modern versions are better than most remember, and the utility is hard to ignore. It gives you milk for baking, coffee, sauces, soups, cereal, and households with children or older adults who need dependable calcium and protein sources. Fresh milk is one of the first things to become inconvenient in any disruption. It spoils quickly, costs more than people expect, and disappears fast when demand spikes. Powdered whole milk turns that fragile category into a manageable one. And then there's freeze-dried coffee, which some people still insist on calling non-essential. In strict survival terms, fine. In real human terms, not even close. Caffeine supports alertness, routine, and morale. Those aren't luxury functions when people are tired, stressed, underslept, and trying to make reasonable decisions. A stable coffee supply can also save a surprising amount of money by reducing those small but relentless convenience purchases. One coffee out can cost the same as several days of home-prepared servings. Multiply that by a month and suddenly your emergency pantry is being financed by not standing in line for overpriced caffeine. When you step back, the larger pattern becomes obvious. The best pantry isn't the one with the most cans. It's the one built around stability, flexibility, nutrition, and the very human reality that people need food they'll actually want to eat. The households that struggle most are usually not the ones with zero food. They're the ones with the wrong food, too narrow, too bland, too dependent on the store always being stocked tomorrow. A smarter pantry protects you in more than one way. It softens price shocks. It gives you options when supply gets uneven. It keeps basic meals from turning into daily punishment. And maybe most importantly, it keeps you from feeling at the mercy of whatever the next grocery receipt decides to do. That's the real value here. Not fear, not drama, just fewer bad surprises, better decisions, and a household that's a little harder to rattle. If this made you think differently about what you keep at home, consider subscribing. And the next time you walk through a grocery store, look past what feels normal and ask a better question. If prices rose again next month, which items would you wish you had bought today?